Sign it, Jonathan Pierce snapped, and when Emma's hand didn't move fast enough, he slammed his fist down on the table so hard the water glasses jumped. He seized the pen and threw it at her, striking her chest. 12 years, and you still can't do one simple thing right. He leaned in until she could feel his breath. I already froze your accounts. I already changed the locks. You walk out of here with nothing exactly like you came in. Now sign the paper before I make this worse for you. If you believe a woman's silence is never her weakness, subscribe right now and follow Emma's story to the very end. And comment the name of the city you're watching from so I can see how far this story has traveled. Emma Caldwell looked at the pen for a long moment before she picked it up. She had imagined this moment more times than she would ever admit. Late at night, when Jonathan came home smelling of a perfume that wasn't hers, she had imagined how she would scream, how she would throw the crystal glass he loved so much, how she would demand answers he owed her. She had rehearsed 100 speeches in the dark. She had memorized the accusations. She had prepared herself to fight for her marriage the way a drowning person fights for air. But now that the moment was here, she felt none of it. She felt calm, and that terrified her more than the divorce itself. You're really not going to fight, Jonathan said. It wasn't a question. It was a boast. He leaned back in his chair with the confidence of a man who had already counted his winnings. 12 years, and this is how it ends. Just a signature. Did you want me to fight? Emma asked. The question caught him off guard. He blinked. I want you to sign the papers. Then I'll sign the papers. Her lawyer, a tired man named Harold, whom she had hired only 3 days earlier, shifted uncomfortably beside her. He had told her quietly in the hallway that she was entitled to more, that she should contest the terms, that a woman who had supported her husband's career for over a decade did not walk away with nothing. But Emma had shaken her head. He'll drag it out for years, she had said. He has money and lawyers and time. I have none of those things. I have myself. And I'd rather leave with myself intact than spend 3 years fighting for scraps at his table. Harold had looked at her like she was making the biggest mistake of her life. Maybe she was. But there was something Jonathan had never understood about his wife. Emma didn't measure her worth by what a man was willing to give her. She had learned over 12 slow and painful years that the more she asked for from Jonathan Pierce, the less she seemed to be worth in his eyes. So she stopped asking. And in the stopping, she had discovered something dangerous. She had discovered that she no longer needed him to tell her who she was. She signed her name, Emma Caldwell, not Emma Pierce. She had already decided that. She was taking her own name back. Jonathan watched the ink dry with visible relief. Good, he said. That wasn't so hard, was it? No, Emma said quietly. It wasn't. She stood, gathered her coat, and turned toward the door. And it was in that moment, with her hand on the cold brass handle, that she heard the thing that would replay in her mind for weeks afterward. Jonathan, already reaching for his phone, already moving on, already gone, said one sentence to his lawyer that he thought she couldn't hear. Make sure the accounts are frozen by noon. I don't want her touching anything before she figures out what's happening. Emma stopped. She didn't turn around. She didn't gasp. She didn't let him see the ice slide down her spine. But she understood in that single sentence exactly what kind of man she had been married to. This was not a divorce. This was an ambush. He had planned it the way he planned a hostile takeover, cutting off her resources before she understood the battle had even begun. Something wrong? Jonathan asked, noticing she had stopped. Emma turned then, and she smiled at him, a small, strange smile that made the confidence flicker on his face for just half a second. No, she said. Nothing's wrong. Sometimes leaving is the only way to stop losing yourself. Then she walked out. She made it to the elevator before her hands began to shake. She made it to the lobby before the reality of it hit her. And she made it all the way to the sidewalk into the cold gray river of Manhattan pedestrians before she pulled out her phone with trembling fingers and opened her banking app. The screen loaded, account access restricted. She tried the other account, the joint savings they had built together, the one she had contributed to for years, the one that held the money she had earned back when she still had a career. Account access restricted. The credit card declined. She stood frozen on the sidewalk while the city moved around her, thousands of people brushing past a woman who had just learned that her entire life had been quietly dismantled while she slept. She had walked into that law office that morning, believing she was ending a marriage. She was walking out, having learned she'd been robbed by the man who once promised to love her. "He froze everything," she whispered to no one. He actually froze everything. By noon, exactly as he had ordered, the last door closed. When she called the doorman at the apartment building where she had lived for 8 years, he told her in a voice thick with apology that Mr. Pierce had removed her from the resident list that morning. Her key would no longer work. Her belongings, he said carefully, had been packed and would be released to her at a time to be arranged through Mr. Pierce's attorney. "But my things are in there," Emma said. "My mother's ring, my photographs, my grandmother's letters." "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Pierce." "Caldwell," she said automatically. "It's Caldwell now." She hung up before he could apologize again. And there she stood, Emma Caldwell, 40 years old, one suitcase in her hand because it was the only thing she had thought to pack that morning, standing on a Manhattan street corner with no home, no money, no husband, and no plan. She wanted to cry. She could feel it building behind her eyes, the enormous pressure of 12 years collapsing all at once. But she didn't cry, because a strange voice had begun speaking inside her, quiet and steady, a voice she hadn't heard in years. "He thinks he just took everything from you," the voice said. "But you can't take everything from a person who's already learned to live with nothing." Emma took a breath. Then she picked up her suitcase and started walking, because standing still was the only thing that could kill her now. She called the one person she still trusted. Rachel had been Emma's friend since college, back before Jonathan before Emma had slowly, without noticing, allowed her entire world to shrink, to fit inside her husband's ambitions. Rachel lived in Brooklyn now in a small apartment above a bakery, and she answered on the second ring. "Emma, what's wrong? You sound strange. Can I stay with you?" Emma asked. Her voice was steadier than she expected. "Just for a little while. I don't have anywhere else to go." There was a pause. Then Rachel, who had never once said "I told you so" in all the years she had watched her friend disappear, simply said, "Get on the train. I'll have the couch made up before you get here." Emma closed her eyes. "Thank you." "Don't thank me," Rachel said. "Just come home." Home. The word did something to Emma's chest. She had lived in a $2 million apartment with a view of Central Park, and she had never once thought of it as home. And now a stranger's couch in Brooklyn felt more like belonging than anything she'd known in years. The train ride took 40 minutes. Emma spent every one of them staring at her own reflection in the dark window as the tunnels flashed past, trying to recognize the woman looking back at her. Rachel was waiting on the platform. She took one look at Emma, at the single suitcase, at the way her friend was holding herself together with nothing but willpower, and she didn't ask a single question. She just wrapped her arms around Emma and held on. And that was when Emma finally broke. Right there on the Brooklyn subway platform, with the rats scurrying along the tracks and the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, Emma Caldwell cried for the first time in 3 years. Not the delicate, controlled tears she'd allowed herself in front of Jonathan. Real crying. Ugly, shaking, gasping crying, the kind that comes from a place so deep you didn't know you'd been storing the pain there. Rachel held her through all of it. "He froze the accounts," Emma managed between sobs. "He changed the locks. He took my mother's ring, Rachel. He took her ring." "I know," Rachel whispered, even though she didn't. "I know. How did I not see it? How did I marry a man who could do this and not see who he was?" Rachel pulled back and held Emma's face in both hands. "Because you loved him," she said. "And loving someone isn't a crime even when they don't deserve it. What he did is on him, Em. Not on you, not for 1 second on you." Emma wiped her face with the back of her hand. "I have nothing," she said. "I'm 40 years old and I have nothing." Rachel smiled, and there was something fierce in it. "You have a college degree. You have 12 years of experience running strategy for one of the biggest investment firms in New York, even if he took the credit for all of it. You have a suitcase, a couch, and a friend who is not going anywhere." She picked up Emma's bag before Emma could argue. "That's not nothing. That's a start." That night, lying on Rachel's couch in the dark, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of Brooklyn, the sirens, the laughter from the street, the rumble of the trains, Emma didn't sleep. She lay awake and she remembered. She remembered the woman she had been before Jonathan, because there had been a woman before Jonathan, and Emma had spent so long forgetting her that she'd almost convinced herself the woman had never existed. Before the marriage, before she became Mrs. Pierce, Emma Caldwell had been one of the sharpest strategic minds at Haller & Associates. She had a gift, everyone said so, a gift for walking into a room full of panicking executives and seeing the one thing they had all missed. She could read a failing company the way a doctor reads an X-ray. She could find the fracture. She could name the disease. And when everyone else was drowning in numbers and fear, Emma Caldwell stayed calm because calm was where she lived. She had been on track to become the youngest partner in the firm's history. And then she had met Jonathan Pierce, a hungry young executive with ambition burning behind his eyes, and she had made the oldest mistake in the world. She had believed that his dreams were big enough for both of them. She had believed that if she helped him rise, they would rise together. So she had quietly fed him her insights. When his deals went sideways, it was Emma who found the angle to save them at midnight over cold coffee at their kitchen table. When his presentations fell flat, it was Emma who rewrote them into something that made boardrooms lean forward. And slowly, without either of them ever naming it out loud, Emma's brilliance had become Jonathan's reputation. "You're my secret weapon," he used to tell her, kissing her forehead. "I couldn't do any of this without you." And she had believed that meant something. She had believed it right up until the day he no longer needed her. Somewhere in the last 3 years, Jonathan had stopped bringing his problems home. He'd hired a young analyst named Victoria Lane, hungry and sharp and 29 years old, and suddenly he didn't need Emma's midnight insights anymore. He had a new secret weapon, a younger one, and Emma, who had given up her own career to fuel his, found herself with nothing to fuel and no career left to return to. She had let herself become invisible, and a man like Jonathan Pierce discards what he can no longer see. Emma stared at Rachel's ceiling and made herself a promise in the dark. Never again, she thought. Never again will I disappear inside someone else's life. I would rather stand alone with nothing than kneel beside a man with everything. She didn't know it yet, but that promise was about to be tested in ways she could never have imagined. The next morning, Emma began the humbling work of rebuilding a life from the ashes. She thought it would be hard. She did not understand yet how hard. She updated her resume, which was a strange and painful exercise, because the last 12 years of her professional life were essentially blank. What was she supposed to write unpaid strategic advisor to a husband who took all the credit? She had no recent employment, no references who would speak for her, no title that belonged to her name. She started with the firms she had known before, back when she was rising. She sent emails, she made calls, and she discovered one polite rejection at a time that the world she had left 12 years ago had closed behind her like water closing over a stone. "Emma Caldwell," said the recruiter at her old firm, a woman who had been an intern when Emma was a star. "Wow, it's been years. What have you been up to?" "I've been away from the industry for a while," Emma said carefully, "but I'm looking to come back. My strategic experience is still current. I've stayed informed. The thing is," the recruiter interrupted gently, "the industry's changed a lot. The tools, the models, the pace of everything. A 12-year gap it's a lot to bridge. I'm not saying it's impossible, but you'd be competing against people half your age who've never left." Emma closed her eyes. "I understand. I'll keep your resume on file," the recruiter said, in the tone of someone dropping it directly into the trash. That conversation repeated itself a dozen times over the next 2 weeks. Different voices, same message. She had experience, they all said, but the industry had moved forward. And Emma heard underneath the polite words the thing none of them would say out loud. They saw a divorced woman in her 40s. They didn't see the strategist she had been. They didn't see the mind that could walk into a burning building of a company and find the exit no one else could see. They saw a gap on a resume and a woman they assumed was desperate. "They're wrong about you," Rachel said one night, watching Emma stare at another rejection email. "You know that, right? Do I?" Emma set down her phone. "Maybe they're right, Rachel. Maybe I let too much time pass. Maybe the woman I used to be is just gone." "She's not gone," Rachel said. "She's sitting on my couch pretending she's gone because it hurts less than admitting she's still in there. and no one will give her a chance." Emma looked at her friend for a long moment. Then, despite everything, she laughed. A tired, cracked, real laugh. "When did you get so wise?" "Around the same time you got so blind," Rachel said, and threw a couch cushion at her. But the laughter didn't pay the bills, and Emma's savings, what little she had managed to move into a personal account years ago without Jonathan noticing, were running dangerously thin. She took a part-time job at the bakery downstairs to earn a little cash while she searched. She, Emma Caldwell, who had once advised boardrooms handling billions, now stood behind a counter at 6 in the morning selling croissants to commuters. And here's the thing that surprised her. She didn't feel humiliated by it. She felt free. There was something honest about the work. She showed up, she did her job, she was paid for what she actually did, and no one took the credit. The baker, a gruff older man named Sal, who had run the shop for 30 years, told her on her third day that she had a good head for the business. "You watch the numbers," he said, nodding at the way she'd reorganized the morning inventory. "Most kids don't watch the numbers. You do." "I used to watch numbers for a living," Emma said. "Yeah," Sal grunted. "What happened?" Emma paused a tray of bread in her hands. "I stopped believing they belonged to me." Sal didn't understand what she meant, but he nodded like he did, and that was enough. 3 weeks into her new life, an email arrived that changed everything. Emma almost deleted it. It came from a company she had never heard of, Monroe Global Holdings, and the subject line: a consulting opportunity for Emma Caldwell, looked exactly like the kind of scam that preyed on desperate people. She hovered her thumb over the delete button. Something stopped her. Maybe it was the name. Not Emma Pierce, not Mrs. Pierce, Emma Caldwell. Whoever had sent this knew her by her own name, the name she had only just reclaimed, the name almost no one in the professional world still connected to her. She opened the email. It was brief and formal. Monroe Global Holdings was seeking a strategic consultant with experience in corporate crisis management. Her name had been recommended. If she was interested, they would like to arrange a meeting. There was a phone number and a name at the bottom. Emma stared at it. "Rachel," she called. "Come look at this." Rachel read it over her shoulder. Monroe Global Holdings. That's a huge company, like an actually huge company. Adrian Monroe, the guy who buys failing companies and turns them into gold. You've heard of them. Everyone's heard of them. He's one of those billionaires who stays out of the spotlight but owns half the world. Rachel looked at her friend. "How does a company like that have your name?" "I have no idea," Emma admitted. 12 years ago, maybe my name meant something, but now, only one way to find out, Rachel said. Emma almost didn't call. She sat with the number for 2 full days arguing with herself. It was probably a mistake. It was probably a mix-up. They would take one look at her 12-year gap and her bakery apron and send her home. She had been rejected enough. She wasn't sure she could survive being rejected by a company this size. It was Sal, of all people, who pushed her. She had told him about it while they were closing up, mostly to laugh at the absurdity of it, and Sal had stopped wiping the counter and looked at her hard. "Let me get this straight," he said. "A billionaire's company sends you a personal invitation, using your real name, offering you a chance to do the exact thing you're good at, and you're going to say no because you're scared." "I'm not scared," Emma said. "I'm being realistic." "Same thing," Sal said, dressed up nicer. He tossed the rag in the sink. "You know what I learned in 30 years of running this place? The doors that scare you are usually the ones worth walking through. The safe doors don't lead anywhere new." Emma called the next morning. The meeting was scheduled for that Friday at the Monroe Global Holdings offices in Midtown, in a tower Emma had walked past 100 times without ever imagining she'd have a reason to enter. She spent her last real money on having her one good suit dry cleaned. Standing in the lobby that Friday morning, watching the elevators swallow and release streams of confident, well-dressed people, Emma felt her old fear rising. She was an imposter. She was a bakery worker in a borrowed-feeling suit. She was a woman whose own husband had decided she wasn't worth keeping. What was she doing here? "You are Emma Caldwell," the quiet voice said, the one that had kept her walking on that first terrible day. "And you have walked into rooms scarier than this one. You just forgot." She squared her shoulders and stepped into the elevator. The office on the 42nd floor was not what she expected. She had braced herself for cold arrogance, for the kind of intimidating power display that Jonathan's world specialized in. Instead, she was shown into a quiet office where a man in his 50s stood to greet her the moment she entered. Actually stood and extended his hand. "Ms. Caldwell," he said. "Thank you for coming. I'm Adrian Monroe." He was not what she expected either. She had pictured the sharp, predatory kind of wealth she knew from Jonathan's circles. Adrian Monroe had a different quality. He was watchful, quiet, with tired, kind eyes, and the settled calm of a man who had nothing left to prove to anyone. "Mr. Monroe," Emma said, shaking his hand, "I have to be honest. I'm not entirely sure why I'm here. My resume has a very large gap in it. I've been out of the industry for over a decade. If you're looking for someone current, I'm probably not." "Sit down, Ms. Caldwell," Adrian said, not unkindly. "Please, before you talk yourself out of a job I haven't even offered you yet." Emma sat. Adrian studied her for a moment. Then he asked a question she wasn't expecting. "Do you remember a company called Ashford Textiles?" Emma frowned. The name pulled at something buried deep a memory from another lifetime. Ashford. That was years ago. 14, maybe 15 years now. A manufacturing company. It was going under. "It was going under," Adrian confirmed. "It was 3 weeks from bankruptcy, 1,200 employees about to lose their jobs. Every consultant who looked at it said the same thing. Liquidate, cut your losses, sell it for parts." He leaned forward. "Every consultant except one." Emma went very still. "A young strategist from Halloran Associates," Adrian continued, watching her face. "She spent 4 days going through the numbers no one else had bothered to read carefully, and she found something everyone else had missed. The company wasn't failing because of its debt. It was failing because of a single supply contract that was quietly bleeding it dry. She restructured it. She found a path through. 1,200 people kept their jobs." He paused. "Do you remember her name?" Emma's voice came out barely above a whisper. "That was me." "That was you," Adrian said. "But how do you—" "Because Ashford Textiles was my company," Adrian said. "It was the first company I ever bought. I was young, and I'd put everything I had into it, and I was about to lose all of it. And a strategist I'd never met walked in and saved 1,200 jobs and my entire future." He held her gaze. "And when the firm sent me the invoice, I noticed something strange. Your fee had been waived, removed entirely. When I asked, 'Why do you remember what you said?' Emma didn't answer. She couldn't. Her throat had closed. "You said," Adrian went on gently, "that the company needed the money more than you did, that there were 1,200 families who just kept their livelihoods, and taking a bonus off the back of that felt wrong." He shook his head slowly. "I have met a great many people in this business, Ms. Caldwell. In 30 years, I've met exactly one who turned down money she'd earned because she thought someone else needed it more. You probably don't remember me, but I have never forgotten you." Emma sat in that quiet office 42 floors above a city that had spent 3 weeks telling her she was worthless, and she felt something crack open inside her chest. Not grief this time, something else, something warm and terrifying and almost forgotten. Recognition. Someone had seen her. Not Jonathan's wife, not a gap on her resume, not a divorced woman past her prime. Her, the real her. The woman she had been before she disappeared, and she was beginning to understand the woman she still was underneath all the years of forgetting. "I don't know what to say," she managed. "Say you'll consider working for me," Adrian said, "because I don't need someone current, Miss Caldwell. Current is easy to find. Every business school in the country pumps out 1,000 current people a year. What I need is much rarer. I need someone who can stay calm when everything is on fire. Someone who can walk into a disaster and see the one thing everyone else missed. Someone who understands that people are not numbers." He spread his hands. "I need who you are, not what your resume says you've been doing lately." Emma looked down at her own hands, hands that had been kneading dough at 6 in the morning, hands that had signed away 12 years without a fight. "There's something you should know," she said finally, "about why there's a gap. My husband, my ex-husband, I know about Jonathan Pierce," Adrian said quietly. Emma looked up sharply. I know that you were the mind behind half his early success, Adrian said. The industry is smaller than people think, Miss Caldwell. There were always whispers about where Pierce's brilliance actually came from. I always suspected. And when I heard recently that he'd divorced his wife, I made some inquiries. His expression hardened just slightly. I heard what he did. The accounts. The apartment. I want you to know that I did not offer you this meeting out of pity. I have no interest in charity, and I suspect neither do you. I offered it because I have been looking for someone like you for a very long time, and it turns out you've been standing in front of me the whole time, waiting for the world to remember what you're worth. For a long moment, Emma couldn't speak. Then she asked the question that mattered most. What exactly are you offering Mr. Monroe? Adrian smiled for the first time, and it changed his whole face. That, he said, is the right question, and it's a longer answer than I can give you here. Are you free tomorrow morning? I'm free every morning, Emma said. I have a very open schedule these days. Then be at Teterboro Airport at 9, Adrian said. There's something I need you to see, and someone I need you to meet. It'll be easier to show you than to explain. An airport? Emma's guard rose again instinctively. Mr. Monroe, I appreciate everything you've said, but I've just come out of a marriage where a powerful man made all my decisions for me. I'm not looking to hand my life over to another one. If you want me to work for you, I need to understand what I'm walking into. Adrian nodded slowly, and there was something like approval in his eyes. Good, he said. That's exactly the answer I hoped you'd give. A woman who'd blindly follow a billionaire to an airport isn't the woman who saved Ashford Textiles. He stood and walked to his window, looking out at the city. The company is facing an expansion, the biggest one in our history, and it's being blocked. Not by the market, not by the numbers, by people. Powerful people who want to control the project through connections and influence and old-fashioned pressure. He turned back to her. I need someone I can trust to lead it. Someone who can't be intimidated, can't be bought, and can't be flattered into looking the other way. Tomorrow, I'll show you the whole picture. And then you can decide with your eyes open whether you want any part of it. No pressure, no obligation. Emma studied him. Every instinct she had, instincts that had been badly betrayed and were now painfully sharp, searched his face for the lie, for the trap, for the catch that men like this always hid behind their generosity. She didn't find one. 9 o'clock, she said. I'll be there. I'll send a car. No, Emma said, standing. I'll get there myself. If I'm going to make decisions about my own life again, I'm going to start with the small ones. I'll find my own way there. Adrian inclined his head, and if he was surprised, he didn't show it. As you wish, Miss Caldwell. She was almost at the door when he spoke again. May I ask you something, he said. It's personal. You don't have to answer. Emma turned. Go ahead. When he handed you those papers, Adrian said, when he took everything, why didn't you fight? It was the question everyone had been asking. Her lawyer, Rachel. She could see it in the eyes of every recruiter who'd rejected her. Why didn't she fight for what she was owed? As if not fighting were the same as not caring. As if her silence had been surrender. Emma thought about how to answer. Because he wanted me to, she said finally. He expected the anger. He'd already written the ending in his head where I scream and cry and beg and prove that I can't survive without him. Every fight I gave him would have just been him getting exactly what he wanted. So I gave him nothing. She held Adrian's gaze steadily. You can't win a game against someone who refuses to play. My silence wasn't weakness, Mr. Monroe. It was the only power I had left, and I used it. Adrian Monroe looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly, like a man who had just confirmed something he'd only suspected. 9 o'clock, he said. Don't be late. Emma rode the elevator down 42 floors in a kind of daze. She stepped out onto the street where 3 weeks earlier she had stood with a suitcase and nothing else, and she realized the city looked different somehow. Not because the city had changed, because she had. For the first time since she'd signed those papers, since she'd learned her accounts were frozen, since she'd cried on a subway platform in her best friend's arms, Emma Caldwell felt something she'd almost forgotten existed. She felt like herself. She called Rachel from the sidewalk. Well, Rachel demanded, how was it? Was it a scam? Did they make you feel small? I swear if some billionaire made you feel small, I will personally... Rachel, Emma said. He remembered me. There was a pause. What? Adrian Monroe. 14 years ago, I saved his first company. I didn't even remember. 1,200 jobs. I turned down the fee because I thought the company needed it more. Emma's voice caught. He remembered me, Rachel. For 14 years he remembered me, and when he heard what Jonathan did, he came looking for me. Rachel was quiet for a moment, then softly, Emma, are you crying? You never cry. I've cried more in the last 3 weeks than in the last 3 years, Emma said, laughing and wiping her eyes at the same time. I think I'm making up for lost time. So what happens now? Emma looked up at the Monroe Global Holdings Tower gleaming against the gray afternoon sky. Now, she said, I go to an airport tomorrow morning and I find out what the rest of my life is going to look like. An airport? Emma, what does that even mean? I don't know yet, Emma admitted. But for the first time in 12 years, Rachel, I'm not scared of finding out. I'm ready. That night she couldn't sleep again, but it was a different kind of sleeplessness. Not the crushing weight of loss, but the electric hum of possibility. She lay on Rachel's couch and let herself really remember the woman she had been at Halloran Associates. The way it felt to walk into a room full of panic and become the calmest person there. The way problems had felt like puzzles instead of threats. The quiet, certain knowledge that she was good at something, that she mattered. She had traded all of it away for a man who used it up and threw her out. But maybe she thought, staring at the ceiling with her heart pounding, maybe she hadn't lost that woman after all. Maybe she'd just left her waiting all these years in a room she'd been too afraid to enter. And maybe tomorrow morning at an airport in New Jersey, she was finally going to open the door and let her back in. Somewhere across the city, in a very different kind of apartment, Jonathan Pierce poured himself a glass of expensive wine and toasted his own cleverness. He had handled the divorce perfectly, he thought. Cleanly, efficiently. No mess, no lawsuit, no drawn-out battle. Emma had been reasonable exactly as he'd predicted. She'd signed and disappeared, and now he was free to build his future with Victoria, unburdened by a wife who'd stopped being useful to him years ago. He had no idea that the woman he'd underestimated was at that very moment standing at the edge of a life bigger than anything he could imagine. He had no idea that the accounts he'd frozen, the apartment he'd taken, the humiliation he'd so carefully engineered would turn out to be the greatest gift he ever gave her. And he had no idea, none at all, that the expansion project he was quietly working to control through his connections and his influence, the deal he was so sure would cement his rise to the very top, was about to run into an obstacle he could never have prepared for. Because standing between Jonathan Pierce and everything he wanted, though, neither of them knew it yet, would be the one person he'd thrown away. The one person he'd taught to have nothing left to lose. The one person who had learned in the hardest way possible exactly how powerful her silence could be. Emma Caldwell closed her eyes on Rachel's couch, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she smiled in the dark. Tomorrow, everything was going to change. She just didn't know how much. Emma Caldwell arrived at Teterboro Airport at 8:45 in the morning, 15 minutes early, because being early was the only thing about her old life she had decided to keep. She had taken 2 trains and a bus to get there, and she had done it on purpose. Adrian Monroe had offered to send a car, and she had said no, and she was glad she had. Because somewhere on that long, cold, complicated journey across 2 states, she had made a decision. Whatever waited for her at that airport, she was going to walk into it standing on her own 2 feet. She had spent 12 years being carried through life by a man who then dropped her the moment she got heavy. She would rather crawl on her own than be carried by anyone ever again. She found Adrian standing near a hangar, dressed simply, no entourage, no assistants hovering, just a man, and behind him a private jet gleaming white in the morning light. Emma stopped walking. "That's a plane," she said. "It is," Adrian agreed. "You want me to get on a plane with a man I met yesterday, to a place you haven't told me?" Adrian nodded slowly. "When you put it like that, I understand your hesitation." "Where are we going?" "Chicago," Adrian said. "There's a company there. It's the center of everything I told you about. The expansion, the men trying to block it. I could show you documents in an office, Ms. Caldwell, but documents lie. People don't not when you're standing in front of them watching their faces. I want you to see the real thing. And then I want your judgment, not your obedience. your judgment. Emma looked at the jet. Something in her chest tightened, and it took her a moment to name it. It wasn't fear of Adrian. It was the memory of another life, when private jets and luxury had been Jonathan's currency, the shiny things he used to make her feel small. "You should be grateful," he used to say, "for the life I gave you," as if her entire worth had been a gift from him that he could take back. "I need to say something before I get on that plane," Emma said. "Say it." "The last man who surrounded me with things like this used them as a leash." Her voice was steady, but there was steel underneath it now. "The private planes, the apartment, the accounts. He gave them to me so he could take them away and watch me break. So understand this, Mr. Monroe. If I get on that plane, it's not because I'm impressed. It's because I've decided to. And the second this starts feeling like a leash, I will get off, and I don't care if we're 30,000 feet in the air." Adrian Monroe looked at her for a long moment. Then unexpectedly, he laughed. Not cruelly, warmly. "Ms. Caldwell," he said, "I think you may be the first person in years who's threatened to jump out of my plane before we've even boarded it." He gestured toward the steps. "Get on, and the moment it feels like a leash, you tell me. I'll land the plane myself." Emma studied his face one more time, then she climbed the steps. The interior of the jet was quieter than she expected, and simpler. She had braced herself for gold fixtures and champagne, for the vulgar display of Jonathan's world. Instead, there were plain leather seats, a table covered in actual paperwork, and a pot of ordinary coffee. It looked less like a billionaire's toy, and more like a mobile office belonging to a man who worked constantly. "You were expecting something flashier," Adrian observed, watching her take it in. "I was expecting to hate it," Emma admitted. "I spent a lot of years learning to hate rooms like this." "Rooms don't have loyalties," Adrian said, sitting across from her as the engines began to hum. "Only the people inside them do. This one's just where I work. Sit. We have 3 hours, and there's a great deal you need to know before we land." Emma sat. The jet began to move. And as the ground fell away beneath her, as Manhattan and Jonathan and the frozen accounts and the changed locks all shrank into nothing behind her, Emma felt something she hadn't felt in longer than she could remember. She felt distance, real physical distance, opening up between her and the life that had nearly destroyed her. "All right," she said, pulling a legal pad toward her. "Tell me everything." Adrian spread the papers across the table between them. "The company is called Halberd Manufacturing," he began. "I acquired a controlling stake 8 months ago. It's an industrial supplier, 4,000 employees, most of them in a single plant outside Chicago. When I bought it, it was dying. Same story as always. Mismanaged bleeding money 3 years from closing its doors and putting 4,000 people out of work. And you saw a way to save it," Emma said. "I saw a way to save it," Adrian confirmed. "The expansion. There's a new market opening up, a contract worth more than the entire current value of the company. If we win it, Halberd doesn't just survive. It doubles. Those 4,000 jobs become 8,000. The town it sits in comes back to life." He paused. "But there are people who don't want that contract to go to a company I control." "Why not?" "Because," Adrian said, "there's a consortium, a group of investors and executives who've had their eyes on that same contract for years. They plan to let Halberd die, buy it for scraps after bankruptcy, and take the contract for themselves. My purchase interrupted that plan, and they are not happy about it." Emma was taking notes now fast, her old instincts waking up. "So they're trying to block the expansion. How?" "Pressure," Adrian said. "Influence. They have connections to the people awarding the contract. They're spreading doubt about Halberd's stability, about my management. They're whispering that the company can't deliver, that betting on us is too risky. And they're using someone." His jaw tightened. "Someone they brought in specifically because he's charming, aggressive, and very good at making people believe whatever he needs them to believe. A deal maker, an investment executive out of New York." Emma's pen stopped moving. Something cold began to crawl up her spine. "What's his name?" she asked, though some part of her already knew. Some part of her had known since the word New York left Adrian's mouth. Adrian looked at her carefully, and there was gentleness in his eyes, as if he understood he was about to hand her a live grenade. "Jonathan Pierce. he said. The name landed in the small cabin like a physical blow. Emma set down her pen. She looked out the window at the clouds streaming past, and for a long moment she said nothing at all. The engines hummed, the coffee cooled, and inside Emma Caldwell 100 things happened at once. "You knew," she said finally, "when you offered me this job, you knew he was involved." "I knew," Adrian said, "and I need you to believe me when I say that is not why I offered it to you. I meant every word in my office. I've been looking for someone like you for years. But when I learned the two things at once, that Jonathan Pierce was the man the consortium was using, and that his discarded wife was the strategist who once saved my company, I will not pretend I didn't see the shape of it." He leaned forward. "I want to be honest with you, Miss Caldwell, because you've had enough men in your life who weren't. There is a part of me that thinks you are exactly the right person for this fight, and there is a part of me that knows that thought benefits me more than it benefits you, so I'm putting it in your hands. If this is too much, if facing him is more than you're willing to carry, tell me now, and I'll give you a different role in a different city, and you'll never have to see his face." Emma turned from the window, and Adrian saw something change in her expression, something settle, something harden into place. "You misunderstand," she said quietly. "You think you're offering me a burden. You're offering me the one thing I've wanted since I walked out of that law office and found out he'd frozen my accounts before I even reached the elevator." She met his eyes. "You're offering me a table to sit at, as an equal, across from the man who threw me away. Emma, I don't want revenge," she said, and she meant it mostly. "I'm not going to spend my energy trying to destroy him. That would just be another way of letting him run my life." She picked her pen back up. "But if the choice is between watching from a distance while Jonathan Pierce charms his way to controlling 4,000 jobs, or sitting at that table and doing my job well enough that he can't, then there's no choice at all. I want the job, Mr. Monroe. All of it, including the part with him in it." Adrian studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded. "There's a condition," he said. "There's always a condition. This one you'll like." He folded his hands. "I won't protect you. If you take the lead on this, you take it as yourself, with your own authority, standing on your own. I won't step in to shield you when it gets hard, and it will get hard, because the moment Pierce realizes who's leading the other side of the table, he will come after you with everything he has. I won't fight that fight for you." He held her gaze. "I believe you can win it alone, but you have to be willing to." Emma closed the folder in front of her. For the first time in years, she smiled, a real one, slow and certain. "Good," she said, "because I don't want to be saved. I've had enough of men saving me and men destroying me. Both of them just decide I can't do it myself." She slid the closed folder back across the table to him. "I want the chance to prove I can. Don't protect me. Don't save me. Just get out of my way and let me work." Adrian Monroe leaned back in his seat, and the look on his face was something close to relief. "Welcome to Halberd Manufacturing, Ms. Caldwell," he said. "You start today." They landed in Chicago at noon. By 1 o'clock, Emma was standing in a conference room on the top floor of the Halberd offices, being introduced to the executive team as the new head of the expansion project. And she watched their faces as Adrian said her name, and she read every one of them the way she used to read failing balance sheets. Skepticism. That was the first thing she saw. A woman they'd never heard of, brought in out of nowhere by the owner, handed the most important project in the company's history. She saw them wondering what her connection to Adrian was. She saw one or two of them assuming they already knew. She saw in particular one man near the end of the table who didn't bother to hide his contempt at all. A tall, silver-haired executive named Gerald Voss, who had been running strategy at Halberd for 15 years and had, Emma would soon learn, expected the expansion project to be his. "Forgive me," Gerald said before Adrian had even finished the introduction, "but could someone explain what qualifies Miss Caldwell to lead the most important initiative this company has ever undertaken? I don't see her name anywhere in this industry. I don't see her at any firm I recognize. I don't see, frankly, anything at all." The room went quiet. Adrian opened his mouth to answer, but Emma spoke first. "You're right," she said pleasantly. "You don't see my name anywhere. That's because for the last 12 years, my work has appeared under someone else's name." She held Gerald's stare without a flicker. "Which means, Mr. Voss, that I have spent over a decade doing brilliant work and letting other people take the credit for it. And I have decided I'm done doing that." She smiled. "You'll have to forgive me if I'm no longer interested in being invisible." There was a beat of stunned silence. Then from the head of the table, Adrian Monroe let out a short, delighted laugh. Gerald Voss did not laugh. His face tightened. He had expected to intimidate her the way men like him had been intimidating women like her for their entire careers. And instead, she had answered him without raising her voice, without insulting him, and without giving him a single inch. He didn't know what to do with that. "We'll see," was all he managed. "We will," Emma agreed. And so it began. Emma threw herself into the work with a hunger that frightened her a little. For 12 years she had been starving, she realized without ever knowing it, starving for something that was hers. And now she was fed a mountain of it, a project so big and so complicated that it swallowed every waking hour, and she devoured it. She spent her first week doing nothing but reading. She read every contract, every financial statement, every memo Halbert had produced in 3 years. She stayed until midnight in a rented apartment the company had provided papers spread across the floor, and she found one by one the fractures. Because there were always fractures. The company had the same disease Ashford Textiles had 14 years ago. Not one big problem, but a dozen small ones, all bleeding quietly, all fixable if someone bothered to look. She looked. And by the end of that first week, she understood Halbert Manufacturing better than any executive who'd worked there for a decade. But understanding the company was the easy part. The hard part had a name, and the name was Gerald Voss. Because Gerald Voss, Emma quickly realized, was not just a bitter executive who'd been passed over. Gerald Voss was working against her. The first sign was small, a meeting she wasn't told about, a set of documents that arrived on her desk incomplete, missing exactly the pages she needed. A key supplier who suddenly stopped returning her calls, then let slip when she finally reached him that Mr. Voss had mentioned there might be changes in leadership coming soon, and he wasn't sure who he should be dealing with. Emma sat with that phone call for a long time after she hung up. "He's sabotaging me," she told Rachel that night, phone pressed to her ear, papers still surrounding her on the floor. "Quietly, carefully, he's making sure I fail, and he's doing it in ways I can't quite prove." "Can you go to Adrian?" Rachel asked. "I could." Emma rubbed her eyes. "But Adrian told me he wouldn't protect me. And more than that, Rachel, if I go running to the owner every time someone pushes back, I prove Gerald right. I prove I only have this job because of my connection to Adrian, not because I can do it." She exhaled. "No. If I'm going to beat Gerald Voss, I have to beat him myself, and I have to do it in a way that makes it impossible for him to ever try again." "You sound like her," Rachel said quietly. "Like who?" "Like the old you. The one from before Jonathan. The one I used to know." There was a smile in Rachel's voice. "God, I missed her." Emma sat very still for a moment. "So did I," she whispered. The chance came 10 days later. There was a major supplier negotiation coming up, one of the most important pieces of the entire expansion. The supplier, a company called Whitfield Components, controlled a material Halbert needed, and getting a favorable deal from them was essential. Gerald had been handling the Whitfield relationship for years, and he had made a point of reminding everyone, loudly and often, that Emma didn't understand the delicate history between the two companies. "With respect," Gerald said in a planning meeting, "the Whitfield relationship is built on 15 years of trust that I personally cultivated. This isn't the kind of thing you can just parachute into. One wrong move and we lose our most important supplier at the worst possible moment." He turned to Adrian. "I strongly recommend I lead the Whitfield negotiation for the good of the company." It was a trap, and Emma saw it instantly. If she let Gerald lead the negotiation, he'd cement his control over the most critical relationship in the expansion and slowly squeeze her out of the very project she'd been hired to run. But if she insisted on leading it herself and failed, she'd hand him the ammunition to have her removed. He had built her a box with no way out. The room waited. Adrian said nothing, watching her, keeping his promise not to protect her. "I appreciate the concern for the company, Gerald," Emma said. "Truly. So let's do it your way and mine both." She smiled. "You lead the Whitfield negotiation, and I'll sit in. I won't say a word unless you ask me to. If your 15 years of trust get us a good deal, I'll be the first to say you were right and I was unnecessary." She let that hang. "But if it doesn't, then I'd like the room to remember that I was there and I stayed quiet, and I gave you every chance." Gerald hesitated. He'd wanted her out of the room entirely. This was worse. Now she'd be a witness. But refusing to let her observe would look like he had something to hide. "Fine," he said tightly. "Observe all you like." "Thank you," Emma said. She spent the next 3 days doing something Gerald never imagined she'd do. She researched Whitfield components down to the bone. While Gerald prepared his usual charm and history approach, Emma quietly pulled every financial disclosure Whitfield had filed, every industry report, every whisper of news about their business. And she found something. She found that Whitfield Components, the supplier Gerald swore was a loyal 15-year partner, was in serious trouble. They'd lost 2 major clients in the last quarter. Their revenue was collapsing, and they needed the Halberd contract far, far more than Halberd needed them. Gerald didn't know this. Gerald was still operating on 15-year-old assumptions, still walking in as the confident partner doing Whitfield a favor, still believing he held all the power. He held none of it. The negotiation was a disaster, exactly as Emma had known it would be. Gerald opened warm and confident, leaning on his relationships, expecting the Whitfield executives to fold out of loyalty and gratitude. Instead, the Whitfield team, desperate and hiding it badly, pushed back hard, demanded higher prices, longer terms guarantees Halberd couldn't afford. Gerald, thrown completely off his script, grew flustered. He'd walked in expecting friends and found people fighting for their survival, and he had no idea why. Emma watched him flail for exactly 40 minutes. She kept her promise. She said nothing. And then at the moment of maximum disaster, when Gerald had backed himself into agreeing to terms that would have crippled the expansion, one of the Whitfield executives turned to her. "You've been very quiet, Ms. Caldwell," he said a little mockingly. "Do you have anything to add, or are you just here to watch?" Gerald shot her a look that said, "Don't you dare." Emma folded her hands on the table. "I do have one thing to add, actually," she said calmly. "I'd like to congratulate the Whitfield team on how well they've hidden their situation. Really, if I hadn't spent the last 3 days reading your quarterly disclosures, I'd almost believe you were negotiating from a position of strength." She smiled gently. "But we both know you lost the Ashford and the Delmont accounts last quarter. We both know your revenue is down 31% year over year. And we both know that if you walk out of this room without the Halberd contract, you don't have another quarter left in you." The Whitfield executive's face went white. The room went absolutely silent. "So here's what's going to happen," Emma continued, in the same pleasant, unhurried voice. "We're not going to accept the terms you just walked Mr. Voss toward. We're going to offer you the contract because we do need a supplier and you make a good product. But we're going to offer it at our number, and you're going to take it. Because the alternative is you go under in 90 days and everyone at this table knows it." She slid a single sheet of paper across the table. "Those are our terms. They're fair. They'll save your company, but they're not negotiable." The Whitfield executives stared at the paper. Then they stared at Emma. Then slowly the lead executive picked up the paper, read it, and said in a very quiet voice, "We'll need a few minutes." "Take all the time you need," Emma said graciously. They took 11 minutes. They signed. Emma had just secured the most important supplier in the entire expansion at better terms than anyone at Halberd had believed possible in a negotiation she had been forbidden to lead, sitting in a chair from which she'd been told only to observe. And she had done it while Gerald Voss sat beside her and watched. The silence in the room afterward, once the Whitfield team had gone, was the loudest thing Emma had ever heard. Gerald Voss stared at the signed contract on the table as if it were a snake. "You," he started, and then stopped because he didn't know how to finish the sentence. "You humiliated me" wasn't quite right because she'd never once insulted him. You went behind my back wasn't right either, because she'd done all her work in the open and told him nothing but the truth. She had simply been better than him completely, and undeniably better in front of witnesses, and there was no version of it he could spin into her fault. You said the Whitfield relationship was built on 15 years of trust, Emma said quietly, gathering her papers. You were half right, Gerald. It was built on 15 years, but it was never built on trust. It was built on you not bothering to check whether the ground under your feet had shifted. She stood. It shifted 2 quarters ago. You just weren't looking. She walked to the door. Then she stopped and turned back, because there was one more thing that needed saying, and she'd learned the hard way what happens when you leave things unsaid. I know you've been undermining me, she said, not angrily, just plainly. The missing pages, the meeting I wasn't told about, the call you made to the supplier about changes in leadership. Gerald's face flickered. I know all of it, and I'm going to tell you what I'm going to do about it. She paused. Nothing. Gerald blinked. Nothing? Nothing, Emma repeated. I'm not going to report you to Adrian. I'm not going to have you fired. I'm not going to spend 1 more minute of my life fighting a man who spent the last 2 weeks trying to make me fail. She held his gaze. Because I don't need to. You just watched me do in 3 days what you couldn't do in 15 years. Everyone in that room watched it. And from now on, every single person in this company knows exactly who's better at this job. I don't need to destroy you, Gerald. I just needed to be undeniable, and now I am. She let that sink in. You can keep fighting me if you want, she added almost kindly, but you'll be fighting the person who just saved this expansion in front of everyone who saw it happen. I'd think about how that goes for you. She opened the door. Or you can decide to actually be useful, and we can build something together. Your choice. But make it soon. And she left him there alone, with the signed contract and the ruins of his own certainty. Word of the Whitfield negotiations spread through Halberd Manufacturing by the end of the day. By the end of the week, the woman the executives had dismissed as Adrian's mysterious hire had become something else entirely. The skepticism didn't vanish overnight, but it shifted. It became curiosity, and then, slowly, it became respect. Because the thing about a company full of people whose jobs are on the line is that they can smell competence the way starving people smell bread, and Emma Caldwell reeked of it. Gerald Voss did not become her friend, but he stopped fighting her, whether it was wisdom or simple self-preservation. He pulled back and Emma let him, and an uneasy truce settled between them that would in time become something almost like partnership. Adrian called her into his office at the end of that second week. I heard about Whitfield, he said. I imagine you did, Emma said. I imagine you hear about everything. I told you I wouldn't protect you, Adrian said. I want you to know how hard that was. When I heard Gerald was undermining you, every instinct I had wanted to step in and shut it down. He shook his head. I'm glad I didn't. Because what you did in that room, no protection could ever have bought me that. You didn't just win a negotiation. You won the company. They believe in you now. All of them. That's worth more than any contract. Emma sat down across from him. Can I ask you something? She said. Always. Why me, really? She searched his face. You could have hired anyone. Someone current. Someone with a resume that isn't a 12-year hole. Someone who didn't come with a bitter ex-husband tangled up in the middle of your biggest deal. Why did you go looking for the woman who saved your company 14 years ago and then disappeared? Adrian was quiet for a moment. Because 14 years ago, he said finally, I was about to lose everything. My first company, my whole future, and a stranger walked in and saved it and then turned down the money because she thought other people needed it more. And I spent the next 14 years building an empire and meeting thousands of brilliant, hungry, talented people. He met her eyes, and not one of them ever turned down money for someone else's sake. Not one. You were the only one. And I realized somewhere along the way that talent is common, Emma. It's everywhere. But character like that is so rare, I only ever saw it once. He spread his hands. So when I got the chance to bring that person into my company, I wasn't going to let a resume gap or an ex-husband stop me. I'd have been a fool. Emma didn't know what to say. She had spent 12 years being told in 1,000 small ways that her kindness was weakness, that turning down credit was foolish, that her instinct to help was a flaw Jonathan generously tolerated. And here was a man telling her that the very thing she'd been taught to be ashamed of was the reason he'd searched the world to find her. "You should know," Adrian said more gently now, "that Jonathan Pierce has been formally engaged by the consortium. It's confirmed. He's going to be at the table when the contract decision gets made, which means at some point in the next few weeks, you two are going to be in the same room." He watched her carefully. "On opposite sides." Emma absorbed this. She had known it was coming. She'd known since the plane. But knowing a storm is coming and standing in the first cold wind of it are two different things. "How is he?" she heard herself ask. It surprised her, the question. "Jonathan, do you know, is he doing well?" Adrian's expression was carefully neutral. "He's doing well. He and Victoria Lane are engaged, I'm told. He's built quite a reputation as the consortium's closer, aggressive, effective. People are a little afraid of him." He paused. "He has no idea you're involved in this, Emma. As far as Jonathan Pierce knows, his ex-wife is a nobody who signed some papers and vanished. He thinks about you exactly as much as he thinks about a coat he threw away." Something moved across Emma's face. Not hurt exactly, something more complicated. "Good," she said softly. "Good. When we finally end up in that room," Emma said, and her voice had gone very quiet and very steady, "I want him to walk in thinking about a coat he threw away. I want him confident. I want him certain. I want him to look across that table expecting to see the same silent woman who signed his papers without a fight." She looked up, and there was something in her eyes that hadn't been there 3 weeks ago. "And then I want him to find out what that coat became after he threw it out." Adrian Monroe looked at her for a long moment, then he smiled. "You know," he said, "I almost feel sorry for him." "Don't," Emma said, standing. "He didn't feel sorry for me. He froze my accounts before I reached the elevator. He took my mother's ring." She walked to the door. "I'm not going to hurt him, Adrian. I meant that. I'm not interested in revenge. But I am going to sit across from him as an equal, and I am going to do my job better than he does his, and I am going to let him watch. And if that ends up costing him everything he's chasing—" She opened the door. "Then he'll finally understand something I learned 3 weeks ago on a Manhattan sidewalk." "What's that?" Emma paused in the doorway. "That you should be very, very careful," she said, "about the people you throw away when you think no one's looking, because sometimes they land somewhere better, and sometimes when you least expect it, they end up sitting on the other side of your table." She left. And that night, back in her rented apartment with the papers spread across the floor and the lights of Chicago glowing outside the window, Emma Caldwell did something she hadn't done in 12 years. She poured herself a single glass of wine, and she made a toast, not to revenge, not to Jonathan, not even to Adrian. She raised her glass to the empty room, to the woman she used to be and the woman she was becoming, and to the strange and painful path that had brought her here. "To the coat," she said quietly, and drank. Then she got back on the floor with her papers, because the expansion wasn't going to save itself, and there was a great deal of work still to do before the day coming soon now when Jonathan Pierce would walk into a conference room expecting an easy win and find his ex-wife waiting for him at the head of the table. She worked until 3 in the morning. She had never been happier in her life. The day Jonathan Pierce learned who was running the other side of the table, he was in the middle of pouring a glass of wine, and he dropped it. It was a Tuesday afternoon, 3 weeks after Emma had crushed the Whitfield negotiation, and Jonathan was in his suite at a Chicago hotel, preparing for the first formal meeting of the contract process. Victoria Lane was there laying out documents when one of the consortium's analysts called with an update on the Halberd team. "They've restructured their whole approach," the analyst said. "It's impressive, honestly. Whoever's leading their expansion is sharp. The Whitfield deal they closed last month, the one nobody thought was possible, that was all her." "Her," Jonathan said, only half listening. "Yeah, new hire, came out of nowhere. Adrian Monroe brought her in personally." Papers shuffled on the analyst's end. "Caldwell. Emma Caldwell." The wine glass slipped out of Jonathan's hand and shattered on the floor. Victoria looked up. "Jonathan? What is it?" Jonathan didn't answer. He was staring at nothing, The phone pressed to his ear, the color draining out of his face. "Say that name again," he said. "Emma Caldwell," the analyst repeated. "You know her." Jonathan hung up without answering. "Jonathan," Victoria crossed the room, "you're white as a sheet. Who's Emma Caldwell?" For a moment, Jonathan couldn't speak. His mind was scrambling, refusing the information, rejecting it the way a body rejects a wrong-typed transfusion. Emma. His Emma. The quiet, agreeable woman who'd signed his divorce papers without a fight and vanished into whatever small life she'd crawled off to. That Emma was leading the Halberd expansion. That Emma had closed the Whitfield deal that his own consortium had failed to predict. Impossible. "She's my ex-wife," Jonathan said finally. Victoria's eyebrows shot up. "Your ex-wife is running the company we're trying to beat." "There's a mistake," Jonathan said, already reaching for his phone. "It's a coincidence. A different Emma Caldwell. My ex-wife couldn't run a lemonade stand. She spent 12 years sitting in my apartment. She has no career, no experience, no—" He stopped, because a memory was surfacing unwelcome from the very back of his mind. A memory of late nights at their kitchen table of his, deals falling apart, and Emma quietly pulling them back together, of her voice saying, "What if you looked at it this way," and solving in 20 minutes what had stumped him for a week. A memory he had spent years telling himself didn't matter, hadn't been real, had just been a wife helping her husband the way any wife would. No experience, he finished weakly, but he didn't believe it anymore. And Victoria, watching his face, didn't believe it either. "Jonathan," she said slowly, "is there something you didn't tell me about where your early deals came from?" "No." Jonathan snapped too fast. Victoria said nothing, but something shifted behind her eyes. A small recalculation, the first hairline crack in the image of the brilliant self-made dealmaker she'd attached her ambitions to. Jonathan didn't notice. He was too busy trying to convince himself that the woman he'd thrown away 3 weeks ago couldn't possibly be the obstacle standing between him and the biggest deal of his career. He would find out in 6 days exactly how wrong he was. Those 6 days Emma spent preparing the way she used to prepare for everything, completely and without mercy. Adrian had told her the date of the first formal meeting. She knew Jonathan would be there. She knew now that he knew she'd be there too, because Adrian's people had confirmed the consortium had learned her identity. So the element of surprise was gone. Good, Emma thought. Let him have 6 days to worry. Let him lie awake the way she had lain awake on Rachel's couch. Let him feel for the first time what it was to see something coming that he couldn't control. "You're not nervous," Rachel observed over the phone. "You should be nervous. You're about to sit across from the man who destroyed your life." "He didn't destroy my life," Emma said, and she realized as she said it that she meant it completely now in a way she hadn't 3 weeks ago. "He interrupted it. There's a difference. He took a life that was already killing me and forced me to build a better one. I'm not walking into that room to get revenge on the man who ruined me, Rachel. I'm walking in as the woman he accidentally set free." "That's very evolved of you," Rachel said dryly. "I'd still key his car." Emma laughed. "I'm not going to key his car. I'm going to do something much worse." "Which is?" "I'm going to be excellent," Emma said, "and make him watch." She prepared for the meeting the way she'd prepared for Whitfield, except more so because the stakes were higher and the opponent knew her tricks. She and Jonathan had been married for 12 years. He knew how she thought. He knew her patterns, and that she realized was both a danger and an opportunity, because she knew him too. She knew every one of his moves, every piece of charm, every aggressive pivot, every way he had of dominating a room. She had watched him do it 1,000 times. She had, in the early years, taught him half of it. She knew Jonathan Pierce better than anyone alive, and she was about to use it. The morning of the meeting, Emma stood in the Halberd offices in a charcoal suit, calm as still water, while the rest of the team buzzed with nerves around her. Gerald Voss, who 3 weeks ago had tried to sabotage her and was now grudgingly one of her staunchest allies, straightened his tie and muttered, "You ready for this?" "I've been ready for 12 years, Emma said. "I just didn't know it." Adrian appeared at her side. "Remember," he said quietly, "I don't protect you in there. You lead, but if you need me—" "I won't," Emma said. "Thank you, but I won't." Adrian nodded, and there was pride in it. "Go show them who you are." At exactly 10 o'clock, the doors to the conference room opened, and the consortium's delegation walked in, and Jonathan Pierce, striding in at the front with all his practiced confidence, looked toward the head of the halberd table and stopped dead. There she was, Emma, his Emma, sitting at the head of the table in a suit that fit like armor papers, arranged in front of her with military precision, looking back at him with an expression of perfect, pleasant, professional calm. Not the woman he remembered, not the quiet ghost who drifted through the last years of their marriage. Someone else entirely wore her face, someone poised and certain and completely unafraid. And Jonathan Pierce felt the ground tilt under his expensive shoes. "Mr. Pierce," Emma said warmly, standing to extend her hand. "Welcome. Thank you for coming. Please have a seat." Jonathan stared at her offered hand. For one terrible moment he didn't move. The whole room watched. His own delegation glanced at him, confused by the hesitation. And Emma stood there, hand extended, smiling, waiting in complete command of a moment she had engineered down to the second. Jonathan took her hand because he had no choice. "Emma," he said, and his voice came out wrong, too quiet, too uncertain. He cleared his throat and tried again, reaching for the old confidence. "This is a surprise." "Is it?" Emma said pleasantly. "I understood your people identified me last week. I'd have thought you'd had time to get used to the idea." She released his hand and gestured to the chairs. "Shall we begin? I know everyone's busy." And just like that, before the meeting had even started, Emma Caldwell had taken control of the room. The negotiation that followed was, everyone who witnessed it would later agree, one of the most extraordinary things they had ever seen. Jonathan came in swinging because swinging was what he knew. He launched into the consortium's case with all his usual aggression, painting Halberd as unstable, Adrian's management as reckless, the whole expansion as a risky bet that no one awarding the contract should trust. It was a good performance. It was the performance that had made his reputation. Aggressive, confident, relentless. And Emma dismantled it without ever once raising her voice. "You've made a strong case that Halberd is unstable, Mr. Pierce," she said when he finally paused. "It's a compelling story. There's just one problem with it." She slid a document across the table. "It's not true, and I can prove it isn't line by line with the company's actual numbers, which I've brought copies of for everyone. You're welcome to check my figures against yours." She smiled. "Though I suspect your figures are 8 months old. They'd have to be, because everything you just described was true when Mr. Monroe bought the company. It stopped being true about 6 weeks after I arrived." Jonathan grabbed the document, scanned it, his jaw tightened because it was airtight. Every claim he'd made Emma had a counter for. Not opinions, not spin. Facts documented, dated, undeniable. She'd anticipated his entire attack and prepared the refutation before he'd even opened his mouth. It was, Jonathan realized with slow horror, exactly the kind of thing he used to do to his own opponents. Except now it was being done to him by the woman he'd spent 12 years underestimating. "These numbers are optimistic projections," Jonathan tried. "Best-case scenarios. In the real world." "They're not projections," Emma interrupted, still perfectly pleasant. "They're actuals. Last quarter's real closed audited actuals. The projections are on the next page and they're conservative, and I'd be happy to walk the committee through the assumptions behind each one." She tilted her head. "But you already know they're solid, Jonathan. You've read them. I can see it on your face. You came in here with a story, and the story just fell apart, and now you're improvising. I know that look." Her voice softened, almost kind, and somehow that was worse. "I've seen it across a kitchen table 100 times, right before I fixed it for you." The room went very still. It was the only personal thing she'd said, the only crack in the professional surface. And it landed like a blade sliding between ribs, because everyone in that room, both delegations, understood in that instant exactly what she'd just revealed. That the great Jonathan Pierce's early brilliance had a source, and the source was sitting at the head of the table. Jonathan's face went red, then white. Victoria Lane, sitting 3 seats down from him, was staring at him now with an expression Emma recognized. It was the expression of a woman doing math she didn't like, the expression of someone realizing the man she'd bet her future on might be built on a foundation she'd never seen clearly. "That's a lie," Jonathan said too loud. "She's lying. She had nothing to do with my career. She was my wife. She kept the house." "I never said I did anything to do with your career," Emma said mildly. "I said I've seen that look across a kitchen table. Everyone drew their own conclusions." She let that hang for one devastating beat. "Shall we get back to the contract we were discussing, Halberd's stability? And I believe I've addressed your concerns. Do you have others?" Jonathan had others. He tried them all. For the next 2 hours, he threw everything he had at her, and Emma met every single strike with the same infuriating, immovable calm. He got aggressive. She stayed serene. He tried to talk over her. She waited unbothered and continued exactly where she'd left off the moment he ran out of breath. He appealed to the committee's fears. She answered their fears with data. He tried near the end to rattle her personally, dropping little barbs about her sudden reinvention and her convenient new patron, implying to the room that she'd gotten her position through her relationship with Adrian Monroe. That one Emma had been waiting for. "You're suggesting I got this job by sleeping with the owner," she said so directly that the whole room flinched. "Let's just say the quiet part out loud since you clearly want to. You're implying I'm here because of Adrian Monroe's personal interest in me rather than my qualifications." Jonathan hadn't expected her to name it. He faltered. "I didn't say—" "You implied it. 3 times now." Emma's voice didn't rise, but it developed an edge like a razor. "So, let me address it once clearly so no one has to wonder. 14 years ago, I saved Adrian Monroe's first company from bankruptcy. 1,200 jobs. I did it in 4 days, and I turned down my fee because I thought the company needed the money more than I did. He remembered that for 14 years. And when he needed someone who could do the impossible under pressure, he came looking for the woman who'd already done it once." She held Jonathan's stare. "That's why I'm here. Not because of anyone's personal interest. Because I'm the best person in the country for this job, and a man who'd met me once 14 years ago knew it, even when the man who was married to me for 12 years never bothered to notice." Silence. Complete ringing silence. Jonathan opened his mouth. Nothing came out. And in that silence, the balance of the entire room shifted permanently and visibly from the confident New York dealmaker to the calm woman at the head of the table. The committee members were no longer looking at Jonathan as the authority. They were looking at Emma. His own delegation was looking at Emma. Even Victoria Lane was looking at Emma, and there was something in her face now that wasn't quite respect, but was moving in that direction, something like the recognition one survivor gives another. Adrian Monroe, sitting quietly against the wall where he'd promised to stay out of it, watched his new expansion head control a room full of powerful men without ever once raising her voice, and thought not for the first time that hiring Emma Caldwell had been the single best decision of his career. The meeting ended without a final decision because these things never end with a final decision. But everyone in the room knew what had happened. The consortium had come in expecting to steamroll an unstable company and its mysterious new hire. Instead, they'd watch their star closer get systematically taken apart by a woman he'd apparently badly misjudged. Jonathan gathered his papers with shaking hands. The delegations filed out, and Emma deliberately took her time so that she was still there alone at the head of the table when Jonathan looked up and realized the room had emptied, and it was just the two of them. For a moment, neither of them spoke. 12 years of marriage sat in the air between them, a wedding, a dozen anniversaries, 1,000 dinners, a kitchen table where she'd saved his career over and over while he took the credit, a cold morning in a law office, frozen accounts, a stolen ring. "How?" Jonathan said finally. His voice had lost all its polish. He sounded for the first time Emma could remember genuinely lost. "How did you do this? 3 weeks ago you were nothing. You signed the papers and you—" He stopped. "I disappeared," Emma finished for him. "That's what you were going to say. 3 weeks ago I disappeared and now I'm here and you can't understand how." She stood gathering her folder. "I'll tell you how, Jonathan. Because I think you actually deserve to know, and because I don't think you ever will unless I say it out loud." She walked around the table until she was standing across from him. "For 12 years you told me who I was," she said quietly. "You told me I was your wife, your support, the person who kept the house while you did the important things. And I believed you. I let you tell me I was small because you needed me small so that you could feel big. And every time I solved one of your problems, you took the credit, and I let you because I loved you. And I thought that's what love was, making yourself smaller so someone else could grow." Her voice didn't waver. "And then you threw me away. You froze my accounts before I reached the elevator. You took my mother's ring. You did everything you could think of to make sure I hit the ground as hard as possible." Jonathan flinched. "And here's the thing you never understood," Emma continued. "When you throw away someone who spent 12 years shrinking to fit in your shadow, and you finally take away the shadow, do you know what happens?" She held his eyes. "They get to grow. For the first time in 12 years, there was nothing standing over me telling me to stay small. So I didn't. I grew back to my actual size, Jonathan. And it turns out my actual size is a lot bigger than you ever let me be." Jonathan stared at her, and something broke in his face, some last piece of the story. He'd told himself the story, where he was the powerful one, and she was the burden he'd generously carried. "I made you," he said, but it came out weak, almost pleading. "The life we had, everything you were. I gave you all of it." "No," Emma said gently. "That's the lie you needed to believe. But it was always backwards, Jonathan. I made you. Half your early career came off my kitchen table at midnight, and you were so sure it was all you that you threw away the actual source of it and replaced me with Victoria, and never once suspected you'd just cut off your own right hand." She almost smiled. "You didn't destroy me when you left. You just finally stopped taking credit for me. And it turns out that once I got the credit back, I did just fine." She turned to go. "Emma." His voice cracked on her name. "The contract. If Halberd wins this, the consortium collapses. My whole reputation is riding on this deal. If I lose it to you, I'm finished. Do you understand? You'll finish me." Emma paused at the door, and for a moment, a real moment, something old and tender flickered in her chest. Because she had loved this man once. She had stood at an altar and promised him forever. And there was a part of her, a small, stubborn human part, that did not want to watch him fall. But she thought about her mother's ring locked away where she'd never see it again. She thought about standing on a Manhattan sidewalk with one suitcase. She thought about the recruiter's voice saying the industry has moved forward. She thought about crying on a subway platform because a man she'd given 12 years had decided she was worth nothing. And she thought about the 4,000 people at Halberd whose jobs depended on this expansion. The 4,000 families who would keep their livelihoods if she won and lose them, if the consortium got its way and gutted the company for parts. "You're asking me to lose on purpose," she said slowly, "so that you don't have to face the consequences of your own choices. You're asking me to shrink myself again, to make myself smaller, so you can stay big." She shook her head, and her voice was sad but absolutely certain. "I'm not going to do that, Jonathan. Not because I want to hurt you, but because there are 4,000 people who need me to win, and not one of them ever threw me out on a sidewalk. I'm going to fight for them with everything I have, and if that finishes you, then you'll have finished yourself. I'm just the one who stopped covering for you." She opened the door. "For what it's worth," she added quietly without turning around, "I hope you land somewhere. I really do. I know what it's like to fall. But I'm not going to break my own fall for you the way I did for 12 years. Those days are over." And she walked out, leaving Jonathan Pierce alone in the empty conference room, surrounded by the wreckage of every story he'd ever told himself about who he was and who she wasn't. Out in the hallway, Adrian was waiting. He didn't say anything. He just looked at her, and Emma looked back, and something passed between them, understanding respect, and underneath it, quiet and unhurried, something neither of them had named yet. "You heard?" Emma asked. "Enough," Adrian said. "I promised I wouldn't protect you. I didn't promise I wouldn't listen at the door." A pause. "How are you?" Emma considered the question honestly. She checked inside herself for the old wounds, the anger, the heartbreak, the desperate need to be vindicated. and she found to her surprise that they were quieter than they'd ever been. Not gone, but quieter, healing. "I'm free," she said finally. "For the first time since I can remember, Adrian, I walked into a room with that man in it, and I walked out still myself. He didn't shrink me. He couldn't. I don't think he can anymore." She let out a breath that seemed to carry 12 years with it. "I think I'm actually free." Adrian smiled. "Then let's go win a contract," he said, "and make it official." But the fight was not over. Not by a long way. Because Jonathan Pierce, sitting alone in that emptied room, had come to a decision. He had lost the meeting, yes. He had lost the room. But he had not lost the contract, not yet, and Jonathan Pierce had never in his life lost gracefully. If he couldn't beat Emma with facts, he would beat her another way. The consortium had resources. It had connections. It had leverage the committee never saw. And Jonathan, wounded and cornered and desperate, was about to do something that would take this from a clean professional fight to something much darker. He pulled out his phone and made a call. "It's me," he said when the line connected. "We're not winning this straight. She's too good, they've got the numbers. And if it comes down to merits, we lose." He paused, listening. Then his voice dropped quieter, uglier. "So we don't let it come down to merits. Everybody's got something in their past they'd rather keep buried. Even her." Another pause. "Especially her. Find it. I don't care what it costs. Dig up everything there is on Emma Caldwell, on Adrian Monroe, on that whole company. Somewhere in there is something we can use, and when you find it, you bring it to me." He hung up. And across the city, riding down in the elevator beside Adrian Monroe, feeling for the first time in years like a whole person, Emma Caldwell had no idea that the man she'd just faced with such grace had already decided to stop fighting fair. She thought the hard part was over. She had no idea it had only just begun. The first sign that Jonathan had changed the rules came 9 days later in the form of a phone call that made Emma's blood run cold. She was in her office, deep in the final projections for the contract bid, when Adrian appeared in her doorway with a look on his face she hadn't seen before. Not calm, not amused, grim. "We have a problem," he said, and closed the door behind him. Emma set down her pen. "What kind of problem?" "The kind with lawyers." Adrian dropped into the chair across from her. "In the last week, 3 of Halbert's biggest clients received anonymous packages. Documents. All of them suggesting that the company is under investigation for financial irregularities. Fraud, specifically. That the expansion is being funded through, and I'm quoting the language here, questionable accounting practices." Emma went still. "Is any of it true?" "Not a word," Adrian said flatly. "It's fabricated. Cleverly, though. Real documents doctored just enough. Real numbers twisted just enough. It's the kind of thing that takes weeks to disprove and 30 seconds to believe." His jaw tightened. 2 of the 3 clients have already called to say they're reconsidering their relationship with us. And this morning, someone leaked a version of it to a trade publication. By tomorrow, half the industry will have read that Halbert Manufacturing is under investigation for fraud. "But we're not." "We're not," Adrian said. "But by the time we prove it, the contract committee will have made its decision. And no committee awards a contract this size to a company that's swimming in fraud allegations, true or not. That's the point. He doesn't need to prove anything. He just needs to poison the water long enough for the decision to go the other way." Emma sat back slowly. "He. Do you even have to ask?" She didn't. She'd known the moment Adrian said the word fabricated. This wasn't the consortium being aggressive. This was Jonathan cornered and humiliated, doing exactly what he'd always done when he was losing. When he couldn't win the game, he changed it into a game where the rules didn't matter. "He came after the company," Emma said quietly. "Not me, the company. The 4,000 jobs." "He came after all of it," Adrian said. "And Emma, I have to be honest with you, this is bad. If we can't kill this story fast, we don't just lose the contract. The fraud allegations alone could sink the company. Clients leave, suppliers get nervous, banks call in loans. A lie this size moving this fast, it doesn't have to be true to be fatal." For a long moment, Emma didn't say anything. And Adrian watched her, and he saw the thing he'd hired her for. He saw her not panic. He saw her go very still and very calm, the way a surgeon goes calm when the bleeding starts, and he watched her mind begin to move. Okay, she said finally. First question. How do we know it's Jonathan and not just the consortium generally? We don't for certain, but the timing... Timing isn't proof. Emma was already pulling a legal pad toward her. If we're going to fight this, we can't fight a feeling. We need to know exactly who did it, exactly how, and exactly what we can prove. Because here's the thing, Adrian. She looked up. A lie that can destroy us can destroy them too, if we can prove it's a lie and prove who told it. Jonathan just made a mistake. He thinks he attacked us. But if I can trace this back to him, he didn't attack the company. He handed me a weapon. Adrian studied her. You have a plan. I have the beginning of one, Emma said. But I'm going to need you to trust me, and I'm going to need you to keep your promise not to protect me because what I'm about to do is going to get dangerous, and if you step in and try to save me halfway through, you'll get us both killed. She met his eyes. Can you do that? Adrian was quiet for a moment. 1,200 jobs, he said finally. 14 years ago, you saved 1,200 jobs by looking at what everyone else refused to look at. Now it's 4,000. He stood. Do what you do, Emma. I'll stay out of your way. The next 72 hours were the hardest of Emma's professional life. She started where she always started, with the documents themselves. She got copies of the fabricated packages from the clients, and she spread them across her office floor at midnight, exactly the way she'd once spread Jonathan's failing deals across their kitchen table, and she read them. And she saw his fingerprints all over them. Not literal fingerprints, something better. Patterns. The way the documents were structured, the specific accounting language used, the particular way the numbers had been twisted. Emma had spent 12 years reading Jonathan's work, cleaning up Jonathan's work, and she knew his handwriting even when it was disguised, even when someone else had typed it. There were phrases in these documents that she had heard come out of Jonathan's mouth 100 times. There was a way of building a false narrative that was so distinctly unmistakably his that reading it was like hearing his voice. It's him, she told Adrian at 2 a.m, calling from her office floor. I can't prove it in court yet. But it's him. I'd know his work anywhere. I used to fix his work. This is the same mind, Adrian. He built this. Knowing isn't proving. No, Emma agreed, but it tells me where to dig. And dig she did. She traced the trade publication leak first because leaks always came from somewhere. She spent hours on the phone calling in favors from a career she'd left 12 years ago, reconnecting with people she'd known before Jonathan, before she'd let her whole world shrink. And she discovered something interesting. The journalist who'd run the story had received it from a PR firm. And the PR firm, when Emma pulled the thread, had been retained just 11 days earlier by a shell company. And the shell company, buried under 3 layers of paperwork designed to hide it, traced back to a name Emma recognized. Not Jonathan's name. He was too smart for that. Victoria Lane's. Emma sat with that for a long time. Victoria. Jonathan's fiancée. His new secret weapon. The woman he'd replaced Emma with. Jonathan had used Victoria's name to hide his tracks, had put her fingerprints on the shell company while keeping his own clean, so that if anything ever came back, it would come back to Victoria and not to him. He was protecting himself by hanging his own fiancée out to dry. And that Emma realized slowly was the crack. That was the fracture in the whole structure, because Victoria Lane was an ambitious woman who'd bet her entire future on Jonathan Pierce, and Emma was willing to bet that Victoria had no idea her name was the one sitting on the paperwork that could send someone to prison for fraud and defamation. I need to talk to Victoria Lane, Emma told Adrian. Adrian frowned. The fiancée? Why would she talk to you? You're the enemy, and you're the ex-wife. That's a special kind of enemy. Because Emma said she doesn't know what Jonathan's done to her yet, and I think when she finds out, she's going to be a lot more interested in talking to me than you'd expect. She was already reaching for her coat. 12 years ago, I was Victoria. I was the ambitious woman who thought Jonathan Pierce was going to be her ticket to everything. I know exactly how that story ends, and I think if I show her the ending early enough, she might decide she doesn't want to live it. Getting Victoria to meet her took 3 days, and a message that Emma agonized over for an hour before sending. She kept it simple in the end. No accusations, no gloating. Just 7 words. Your name is on the shell company. We should talk before it's too late for you. Victoria agreed to meet in a quiet coffee shop far from either of their offices on a gray Thursday afternoon. She arrived guarded, arms crossed, sitting down across from Emma with the wary expression of a woman braced for an ambush. "I know who you are," Victoria said before Emma could speak. "You're his ex-wife, the one running Monroe's expansion. If you think I'm going to help you win some contract by turning on Jonathan, you can save your breath." "I'm not here about the contract," Emma said calmly. "I'm here about you. I don't need your concern." "You need somebody's," Emma said. She slid a folder across the table. "Open it." Victoria didn't move. "Open it," Emma repeated gently. "You don't have to trust me. You just have to read what's in front of you and decide for yourself whether I'm lying." Victoria opened the folder, and Emma watched the color drain from her face exactly the way it had drained from Jonathan's when he learned who was running Halberd's expansion. Because inside that folder was the paper trail, the shell company, the PR retainer, the fabricated documents, and on every piece of it, buried in the fine print, hidden 3 layers deep, one name appearing over and over: Victoria Lane. Not Jonathan Pierce, not once. Jonathan Pierce's name did not appear anywhere in the entire scheme that Jonathan Pierce had built. "This is fake," Victoria whispered. "I never signed any of this. I never set up a shell company. I don't even know what half of this—" She stopped. Her hands had started to shake. "You don't know what it is," Emma finished for her, "because he didn't tell you. He used your name, Victoria. He set up the whole thing under your identity so that if it ever came apart, you'd be the one holding it." Emma's voice was quiet, almost kind. "The fabricated fraud documents that went out to our clients, the defamation, the leak to the press, all of it. Every crime in that folder is a crime that on paper you committed, not him. If this ever goes to court, and I promise you it's going to court, you're the one who goes to prison. He walks away clean. He's already made sure of it." Victoria stared at the folder. Her mouth opened, closed. "No," she said. "No, he wouldn't. We're getting married. He loves me. He wouldn't—" "He froze my accounts before I reached the elevator," Emma said. "On the morning of our divorce, 12 years of marriage, and he'd planned it all in advance, so I'd hit the ground with nothing. He took my mother's ring." She let that land. "I'm not telling you this to hurt you, Victoria. I'm telling you because I was you. 12 years ago, I was the ambitious young woman who thought Jonathan Pierce was going to make all my dreams come true. And I gave him everything, my career, my ideas, my whole self. And the day I stopped being useful, he threw me out on a sidewalk and made sure I couldn't get up." She held Victoria's eyes. "You're not his partner. You never were. You're his shield. And the only reason you're finding that out now, instead of in a courtroom, is that I decided you deserved a warning I never got." Victoria was crying now, silently, the tears just falling while she stared at the evidence of her own betrayal. "Why," she managed, "why would you warn me I'm your enemy? I'm the woman he left you for. You should want me to burn." And this, Emma would think later, was the moment. This was the thing that separated the woman she'd become from the man Jonathan was. "Because burning you doesn't make me whole," Emma said quietly. "For a while I thought it might. I thought if I could just watch him lose everything, watch you both lose everything, it would fix what he broke in me. But it doesn't work that way. Hurting you wouldn't give me my ring back. It wouldn't give me back the 12 years. It would just make me into a smaller, meaner version of the person he already tried to make me." She shook her head. "I don't want to be that. He doesn't get to turn me into that. So no, Victoria, I don't want you to burn. I want you to get out of a burning building before it collapses on you. What you do with that is your choice." For a long moment, Victoria said nothing. Then in a voice so small, Emma almost missed it, she asked, "What do I do?" "That depends," Emma said, "on what kind of person you want to be when this is over." And she laid it out. Over the next hour in that quiet coffee shop, Emma and Victoria Lane, the ex-wife and the fiancée, the two women Jonathan Pierce had used and discarded 14 years apart, built something Jonathan never could have anticipated: an alliance. Victoria had access. She had the passwords, the emails, the record of every conversation. She had, it turned out, kept copies of things, the instinctive self-preservation of a woman who'd sensed somewhere deep down that the man she was with couldn't be fully trusted. She had the proof that the scheme was Jonathan's, that he'd directed all of it, that her name had been used without her knowledge. "If I give you this," Victoria said, "he goes to prison." "Maybe," Emma said. "Or maybe he takes a deal and disappears. I don't know how it ends for him, but I know how it ends for you if you don't. You either hand me the truth now on your own terms as the woman who came forward, or you wait, and I find it anyway, and you're the woman who got caught." She met Victoria's eyes. "One of those is a future, the other one isn't." Victoria looked at the folder for a long, long moment. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a flash drive and set it on the table between them. "It's all on here," she said. "Everything, every email, every instruction he gave me, every time he told me to use my name instead of his and said it was to protect the deal." Her voice cracked. "I believed him. God, I believed everything he said." "I know," Emma said softly. "So did I. For 12 years. Victoria pushed the flash drive across the table, and just like that, the entire structure Jonathan Pierce had built to destroy Halberd Manufacturing collapsed into Emma Caldwell's open hand. The unraveling, once it started, moved fast. Emma brought the flash drive to Adrian, and Adrian brought it to the lawyers, and the lawyers confirmed what Emma already knew. It was airtight. Victoria's records established beyond any doubt that the fraud allegations against Halberd were fabricated, that Jonathan Pierce had personally directed the entire campaign, and that he'd committed defamation fraud and half a dozen other crimes in the process. The evidence was clean documented and devastating. "We could bury him," Adrian said, holding the legal summary. "Criminal charges, civil suit. This is enough to end his career and put him in a courtroom he won't walk out of the same. The question is how hard you want to swing." Emma looked at the summary for a long moment, and she felt at the pull she'd been fighting since the day she stood on that sidewalk with one suitcase. The desire to make him hurt the way he'd made her hurt, to take everything from him the way he'd taken everything from her. It would be so easy, it would be so satisfying, and after everything he'd done, no one on earth would blame her. "No," she said finally. Adrian raised an eyebrow. "No, we're not going to bury him." Emma set the summary down. "We're going to use exactly as much of this as we need to clear Halberd's name and win the contract, and not one page more. We prove the fraud allegations are false. We show the committee that we were the victims of a smear campaign. We win on the merits cleanly, the way we should have won in the first place." She slid the folder back. "And then we're done. Emma, this man tried to destroy 4,000 jobs. He used his own fiancée as a human shield. You could end him and it would be justice." "I know." Emma's voice was steady. "But here's what I've learned, Adrian. If I use all of this to destroy him, then for the rest of my life, I'll be the woman who destroyed Jonathan Pierce. My whole story becomes about him again. Every success I ever have will have an asterisk that says she got her revenge." She shook her head. "I already spent 12 years being defined by that man. I'm not going to spend the rest of my life being defined by how I got even with him. I want to be defined by what I build, not by what I burn down." Adrian looked at her for a long moment. "You're a better person than I am," he said quietly. "If it were me, I'd bury him." "I'm not better than you," Emma said. "I just fought harder to get free, so I'm more careful about not walking back into the cage. Revenge is just a different set of bars." She stood. "Clear our name, win the contract, and let Jonathan Pierce face the consequences of his own choices without me lifting a finger more than I have to. That's not mercy. It's just me refusing to let him live rent-free in my life for one more day." They did exactly that. The evidence went to the contract committee cleanly and professionally. The fabricated fraud allegations collapsed overnight. The clients who'd wavered came back apologizing. The trade publication printed a retraction, and the story that had been designed to destroy Halberd Manufacturing turned in the space of a week into the story of a company that had been viciously and falsely attacked and had responded with nothing but the truth. The committee awarded the contract to Halberd Manufacturing. 4,000 jobs became 8,000. And Jonathan Pierce's world came apart exactly as Emma had predicted, entirely by his own hand. The consortium, when they learned what he'd done, when they saw the evidence that their star Closer had committed provable fraud and defamation that could implicate all of them, cut him loose so fast it was almost cruel. They denied all knowledge. They cooperated with everyone. And they left Jonathan Pierce standing alone, holding a crime he'd committed with the woman he'd tried to frame, having already handed all the evidence to his ex-wife. Victoria left him too, of course. She came to see Emma one last time before she disappeared to start over somewhere new. "I don't know how to thank you," Victoria said. "You had every reason to let me go down with him. You didn't. Go build something real," Emma told her. "Something that's yours. Don't hand it to a man who'll take the credit and throw you out when you stop being useful." She almost smiled. "I speak from experience." "How did you do it?" Victoria asked. "How did you come back from what he did to you? I feel like I'll never—" She stopped. "I feel like he broke something I'll never fix." "He didn't break anything," Emma said gently. "He just made you doubt it was there. It's still there, Victoria. Everything you are is still there. You just have to stop letting someone else tell you it isn't." She squeezed the younger woman's hand. "That's the whole secret. That's all I did. I stopped believing him about who I was, and I started finding out for myself." Victoria left, and Emma never saw her again. But she heard years later that Victoria Lane had built a small, successful consulting firm of her own, entirely under her own name, and that she was good at it, and that she'd never worked for a Jonathan Pierce again. As for Jonathan himself, Emma saw him one final time. It was months later, after the contract was signed and the expansion was underway, and the story had faded from the trade publications. She was leaving a business dinner downtown when she saw him across the street, and she almost didn't recognize him. He looked smaller, not physically. The suit was still expensive, the posture still upright. But the thing that had made Jonathan Pierce, the certainty, the effortless dominance, the absolute conviction that the world belonged to him, was gone. He looked like a man who'd been forced for the first time in his life to see himself clearly and hadn't liked what he'd found. He saw her too. For a moment they just looked at each other across the street. 12 years of marriage and one brutal divorce and everything that had come after standing in the air between them. Jonathan opened his mouth. Emma thought he might apologize. She thought for one strange moment that he might finally say the thing he'd never said, might finally admit what he'd taken from her, might finally see her. He didn't. "You ruined me," he said instead across the street, loud enough for her to hear. "I hope you're happy." And Emma understood in that moment that he would never see it. That to the very end in his own story, he would be the victim, and she would be the villain who destroyed him. That he would go to his grave believing that he'd made her, and she'd ruined him, and never once understand that he'd had it exactly backwards the whole time. And the strangest thing was she felt no anger about it at all. She felt something almost like pity. "No, Jonathan," she said, and her voice carried across the quiet street, steady and clear and completely free. "I didn't ruin you. You did this, every bit of it. I just stopped being the person who cleaned it up after you." She pulled her coat tighter. "I hope you figure that out someday. I really do. Because until you do, you're going to keep losing everything, and you're going to keep blaming everyone but yourself, and that's a very lonely way to live." She turned to go. "Goodbye, Jonathan," she said without looking back. "I hope you find your way. I found mine." And she walked away into the bright, ordinary evening, and she did not look back, and she did not cry, and somewhere around the second block, she realized that the weight she'd carried for 12 years, the enormous, invisible weight of a man who'd made her small, was simply gone. She had set it down without noticing. She was free. The weight was gone, but the woman who'd carried it was still learning what it meant to walk without it. In the months after Jonathan Pierce faded out of her life, Emma Caldwell did something she hadn't allowed herself to do in 12 years. She let herself be happy without waiting for someone to take it away. It was harder than it sounds. Happiness for a person who's been taught that everything good comes with a price feels dangerous. Emma would find herself in the middle of an ordinary good moment, a quiet morning with coffee, a project going well, a laugh with Rachel on the phone, and some old reflex would tighten in her chest, bracing for the catch, waiting for the frozen accounts, waiting for the divorce papers slid across the table, waiting for the man who'd tell her she was small, but the man was gone. And slowly, one unremarkable good day at a time, Emma's body began to believe it. The expansion at Halberd Manufacturing became the great work of her life. The contract that Jonathan had tried so hard to steal turned out to be even bigger than anyone had projected. 4,000 jobs became 8,000, exactly as Adrian had promised, and then the 8,000 started pulling a whole town back to life around them. New businesses opened near the plant, houses that had sat empty filled up again. A high school that had been slated to close stayed open because suddenly there were families with children and paychecks and futures. Emma drove out to that town once about a year in to see it for herself. She stood in the parking lot of the plant at the end of a shift and watched the workers come out. Thousands of them ordinary people in work clothes, tired and talking and laughing, climbing into cars that would take them home to families who ate dinner every night because these jobs existed. And Emma stood there and felt something she had never once felt in 12 years of marriage to a wealthy, successful man. She felt like her life meant something. "You did this," Gerald Voss said. He'd driven out with her. The bitter executive who tried to sabotage her on her first day had become, over the year, something close to a friend. "All of these people, their whole lives, you did this." "We did this," Emma said. "No," Gerald said firmly. "I tried to get you fired in your first week. Don't rewrite history to be gracious. This is you. I've been in this business 30 years, Emma, and I've never seen anyone do what you did. You walked into a dying company and a rigged fight, and you saved all of it." He shook his head. "I owe you an apology I should have given a year ago. I judged you because you came out of nowhere and I thought you hadn't earned it. I was wrong. You'd earned it 100 times over. The world just hadn't been paying attention." Emma was quiet for a moment, watching the workers stream past. "Thank you, Gerald," she said. "That means more than you know." She smiled. "For most of my life, the men around me took credit for my work. It's a strange thing to have one hand it back." "Yeah, well," Gerald cleared his throat gruffly. "Don't get used to it. I'm still going to fight you in the next budget meeting." Emma laughed. "I'd be disappointed if you didn't." The professional recognition came too, though Emma had stopped needing it the way she once had. The industry that had rejected her a year and a half earlier, the recruiters who told her the industry had moved forward, the firms that had filed her resume in the trash, suddenly remembered her name. She got calls now. She got offers. She got invited to speak at the same conferences that had once looked right past her. She turned most of it down, not out of bitterness, but out of clarity. She knew now what she wanted, and she knew it wasn't titles or prestige or the approval of people who'd only noticed her once she was impossible to ignore. But one invitation she accepted. A business school, one of the best in the country, asked her to give a talk to their graduating class. And Emma, who had spent 12 years believing she had nothing worth teaching anyone, stood up in front of 500 young people at the start of their careers and told them the truth. "Most of the advice you'll get today," she began, "will be about how to succeed, how to climb, how to win. I'm not going to give you that advice. I'm going to give you different advice, because I learned mine the hard way." She looked out at all those hopeful faces. Someday some of you are going to build something with another person, a career, a company, a marriage, and you're going to face a choice over and over so small each time that you'll barely notice you're making it. The choice is whether to make yourself smaller so the other person can feel bigger. The room was very quiet. "I made that choice 1,000 times, Emma said. "I shrank myself a little at a time for 12 years, for a man who took everything I gave him and eventually decided I wasn't worth keeping. And I want to tell you something I wish someone had told me at your age." She paused. "A life that disappears when one person leaves was never really your life. It was theirs, and you were just living inside it." She let that settle. "So here's my advice," she finished. "Build a life that's yours, one that doesn't vanish if someone walks out the door. Fill it with work that means something, and people who see you clearly, and a sense of your own worth that no one else gets to hand you or take away. because the people who love you will love you at your full size. And the people who need you small were never really loving you at all. They were using you. And it's a lot easier to tell the difference than you think once you stop being afraid to look. She got a standing ovation, but that wasn't the part she'd remember. The part she'd remember came afterward when a young woman, maybe 22, approached her nervously and said, "I'm engaged to someone who makes me feel small. Everyone says I'm lucky that he's going places that I should be grateful." Her voice shook. "How did you know it was time to leave?" And Emma looked at this young woman, this Victoria, this version of herself, and she said the truest thing she knew. "You already know," she said gently. "You knew before you walked over here. You're not asking me whether to leave. You're asking me for permission to trust yourself." She took the young woman's hands. "So here it is. You have permission. You don't need to shrink for anyone, not him, not your family, not the whole world telling you how lucky you are. Trust the part of you that knows. It's smarter than all of them." The young woman started to cry, and then she started to smile, and then she hugged Emma and walked away, and Emma never learned her name or what she decided. But she thought about her often. She hoped she'd gotten out. She hoped she'd found her full size. And she understood in that moment that the 12 years she'd spent with Jonathan hadn't been wasted after all. Because they'd given her this. The ability to look a frightened young woman in the eye and say, "I've been where you are, and there's a whole life on the other side of that fear." Her worst years had become the thing that let her help someone else survive theirs. That was when Emma stopped thinking of the divorce as the thing that broke her. She started thinking of it as the thing that finally set her free. And then there was Adrian. Their relationship had grown so slowly and so naturally that Emma couldn't have said exactly when it changed. There was no single moment, no dramatic declaration. There was just Adrian, steady and quiet, and endlessly respectful, becoming, over months and then years, the person she most wanted to talk to at the end of every day. He never once tried to make her smaller. That was the thing Emma kept noticing again and again, like touching a bruise that turned out to have healed. Adrian celebrated her wins louder than his own. When she disagreed with him in a meeting, and she often did, he didn't bristle or shut her down. He listened, and half the time he changed his mind, and he never seemed to feel diminished by being wrong. When people praised the expansion, he pointed to her. When people praised her, he beamed, like her success was the best thing that had ever happened to him. "You know what I keep waiting for?" Emma told Rachel one night. They talked most nights now, an old friendship rebuilt into something even stronger than before. "I keep waiting for the catch, for the moment he turns out to be like Jonathan underneath, for the version of him that resents me or needs me small or wants credit for what I do." "And?" Rachel asked. "And it's not there." Emma's voice was full of quiet wonder. "It's just not there, Rachel. I've been looking for a year. There's no hidden version. He's just exactly who he seems to be. Kind, steady, genuinely happy when I succeed." She laughed softly. "I didn't know it could be like this. I spent 12 years thinking love was something you survive, and this doesn't feel like surviving at all." "That's because it's not love that hurts, Em," Rachel said. "It never was. It's just that you'd only ever had the kind that did." The evening it finally became something more, they were standing by the ocean at the end of a business trip that had gone well, watching the water in that comfortable silence they'd grown so good at. "Can I ask you something?" Adrian said. "Always. Do you ever miss it, the life you had before? The apartment, the wealth, all of it? Sometimes I wonder if I pulled you into a harder life than you would have had if you'd just found another version of what you left." Emma considered the question honestly, the way she considered everything now. "No," she said finally, "I don't miss it, not for a single second." She turned to look at him, "And I finally understand why. For 12 years I had a beautiful life that belonged to someone else. I lived inside Jonathan's world, spent his money, hosted his dinners, supported his career, and the day he decided he was done, it all disappeared, because none of it was ever mine." She looked back out at the water. "This life is mine, Adrian. I built it. I earned it. And that means no one can ever take it away from me, because it doesn't depend on anyone else deciding to let me keep it. A life that disappears when someone leaves was never really yours in the first place." She smiled. "This one's mine, down to the ground, and that's worth more than every luxury I ever had in his. Adrian was quiet for a moment. "I love you," he said, simply, no performance in it, just the truth, offered freely, asking for nothing. "I have for a long time, and I need you to know that I'm not saying it to get anything from you. I don't need you to say it back. I don't need you to be anything except exactly what you already are. I just wanted you to know that somewhere in the world there's a man who thinks you're the most remarkable person he's ever met and who would consider himself lucky just to keep being near you, however much or little you want that to mean." Emma felt her eyes fill because it was everything Jonathan had never given her offered without her even having to ask. Love that didn't require her to shrink. Love that celebrated her size instead of resenting it. Love that asked for nothing and offered everything. "You know what's funny?" she said when she could speak. "I spent so long afraid that if I got strong, if I stopped making myself small, no one would love me. Jonathan taught me that. He made me believe my power was a burden that people would only tolerate if I hid it." She reached over and took Adrian's hand. "And here you are, loving me because I'm strong, not in spite of it, because of it." She laughed through the tears. "I didn't know that was even possible." "It's the only kind of love worth having," Adrian said. "The kind that wants you at your fullest. Anything else is just ownership dressed up in nicer clothes." "I love you too," Emma said. "I have for a while. I think I was just afraid to say it because the last time I loved someone, it cost me everything." She squeezed his hand. "But I understand now. It didn't cost me everything because I loved. It cost me everything because I loved someone who wanted me small. Loving you doesn't cost me anything. It just makes everything bigger." They didn't rush anything after that. They'd both lived enough to know that the best things are built slowly. But something had settled between them, something solid and warm and true, and Emma stopped waiting for the catch because she finally understood there wasn't going to be one. Years passed. The expansion at Halberd grew into a genuine success story, the kind they taught in the business schools that had once ignored her. Emma became one of the most respected leaders in her field, not because she'd chased power, but because she'd done extraordinary work, and for the first time in her life, let her own name sit on top of it. She built things. She mentored people, especially young women who reminded her of herself, and she watched some of them grow into their full size, and it was better than any deal she ever closed. She and Adrian built a life together. Not a grand one by Billionaire standards. Adrian had never cared much for the trappings of his wealth, and Emma had learned to distrust them. They worked hard, and they traveled sometimes, and they spent quiet evenings together, and it was, Emma often thought, an almost embarrassingly ordinary kind of happiness for two people who'd both come through so much. She got her mother's ring back eventually. That was a strange day. Jonathan, in the wreckage of his ruined career, facing legal bills and the collapse of everything he'd built, had been forced to liquidate. And somewhere in the process, a lawyer had contacted Emma to inform her that certain personal effects belonging to her wrongfully retained during the divorce were being returned. Her grandmother's letters, her photographs, and her mother's ring. Emma held that ring in her palm for a long time when it came back to her. The last piece of her old life, the thing Jonathan had taken specifically to hurt her, returned now not as a gift from him, but as a consequence of his own downfall. She didn't wear it. She put it in a small box on her dresser where she could see it every morning. Not as a wound, as a reminder. "This is what he took the ring," said. "And this is what you got back. And look at everything you built in between." She heard about Jonathan from time to time, always secondhand, always fading. He never recovered, not really. The fraud he'd committed followed him. The industry had a long memory, and the story of the star Closer, who'd tried to frame his own fiancée and been undone by his ex-wife, became a cautionary tale that trailed him wherever he went. He found smaller jobs, then smaller ones. He remarried, someone said, and divorced again. He grew bitter. Everyone agreed, a man forever explaining to anyone who'd listen how he'd been wronged, how his brilliant career had been stolen from him, how his ex-wife had destroyed everything he'd built. He never once, as far as Emma ever heard, understood that he'd built his own ruin brick by brick, and Emma, when she heard these things, felt neither triumph nor grief. She felt the mild, distant sadness you feel for a stranger on the news, because that's what Jonathan had become to her, a stranger, a man she'd known once in a life that no longer felt like hers. There was one last conversation with Rachel years later that Emma would always remember. They were older now, both of them sitting on the porch of the small house Emma had bought, watching the evening come on. "Do you ever think about it?" Rachel asked. "That morning, the law office, the papers." "Sometimes," Emma admitted. "Do you know what I keep coming back to?" Rachel said. "You could have fought. Your lawyer told you to fight. You'd have gotten money, the apartment half of everything, and you signed it all away and walked out with a suitcase." She shook her head. "Everyone thought you were crazy. I thought you were crazy, and it turned out to be the smartest thing you ever did." "It didn't feel smart," Emma said. "It felt like drowning. But why did you do it really? After all these years, I still don't fully understand." Emma was quiet for a while, watching the light change. "Because," she said finally, "if I'd fought him, I'd have won some money and lost 3 years of my life to a courtroom war with a man I was trying to get free of. Every day for 3 years, I'd have woken up thinking about Jonathan, strategizing against Jonathan, hating Jonathan. He'd have owned my life just as completely divorced as he did married. Maybe more." She turned to Rachel. "I didn't sign those papers because I was weak or because I didn't want what I was owed. I signed them because I understood somewhere deep down that the only way to actually be free of him was to want nothing from him at all, to walk out with nothing so that he'd have nothing left to hold over me." She smiled softly. "He thought my silence meant he'd won, but my silence was me refusing to play a game where he made the rules. It was the one move he couldn't counter because it was the one move that didn't want anything from him." "Sometimes leaving is the only way to stop losing yourself," Rachel said quietly. Emma looked at her friend in surprise. "I said that to him. That morning, right before I walked out. How did you—" "You told me the story 100 times, Em," Rachel laughed. "I've had it memorized for years." They sat in comfortable silence for a while. "Can I tell you the thing I've never told anyone?" Emma said finally. "Always. For a long time I was ashamed of those 12 years. I thought I'd wasted them. I thought I'd been a fool disappearing into someone else's life, letting a man use me up and throw me away. I thought the woman who did that was someone I should be embarrassed about." She watched the last of the light. "But I don't feel that way anymore. Because that woman, the one who shrank, the one who gave everything and got nothing back, the one who signed the papers without a fight, she's the reason I understand what I understand now. She's the reason I could look Victoria in the eye and save her. She's the reason I could stand in front of 500 students and tell them the truth. She's the reason I know all the way down what real love looks like, because I spent 12 years learning exactly what it doesn't." Emma's voice was steady and warm. "I'm not ashamed of her anymore. I'm grateful to her. She survived so that I could live." Rachel reached over and took her hand. "She'd be proud of you," Rachel said. "The woman on that subway platform, if she could see you now." "I think she can," Emma said. "I think she's been watching the whole time. I think she's the one who kept me walking that first terrible day when standing still would have killed me." She squeezed Rachel's hand. "I carried her out of that marriage on my back, and now I get to give her the life she never got to have." The sun went down. The porch grew dark, and Emma Caldwell sat with her oldest friend in a house that was hers, thinking about a billionaire who loved her at her full size, and a ring on her dresser that told the whole story, and a young woman somewhere out there who might have found the courage to leave, and 4,000 families whose lives had been saved by a woman a man once threw away on a sidewalk. Jonathan Pierce had handed her divorce papers, believing he was ending her. He had frozen her accounts and taken her ring and put her out on the street with nothing so certain that a woman who wouldn't fight was a woman already beaten. He had been wrong about all of it, because Emma Caldwell's silence had never been her surrender. It had been the quiet, unbreakable strength of a woman who knew, even when she'd forgotten everything else, that her worth had never once belonged to the man who tried to take it. He didn't destroy her that morning in the law office. He set her free, And she took that freedom and she built a life so completely her own that nothing and no one could ever take it from her again. The greatest transformation was never the private jet or the billionaire or the empire she helped build. It was the moment a discarded woman stood up off the ground, brushed herself off, and finally understood the truth that would carry her the rest of her days. Her silence was never her weakness. It was the strength that let her rebuild everything, and she owed that strength to no one but herself.